With it. So, okay, so we start now our third session in our lecture series for master students about Raumgestaltung, spatial design. The English translation is a little bit different from what you understand in the German meaning of the sense, but overall we're all architects and we're all interested in design and especially in this case creativity, which is our main theme for this semester. And we want to talk about creativity also with you. We have a range of different lecturers and guests with whom we talk, and those guests are from various disciplines. So they are designers, artists, poets, engineers, microbiologists. And you two are both architects, which is very good. So we come back to our core discipline with you a little bit more. And of course, we want to ask people about their approach to creativity, or how it, what are the conditions for it? What are the tools you use? What are all about creativity. And yes, and we would like to ask you to say in the first part to say a little bit about your background and history, and to give a little input, and afterwards we will talk about it. But before we do that, I'll very briefly introduce you. So Bob Brown and Toshiko Terazono, they are both currently located in Plymouth in the UK, and they are at the University of Plymouth. They are both academic teachers. Bob is, I have to look a little bit on this other, Bob runs the Master of Architecture program, and Toshiko also is a design stream leader. So they are both experienced academics and designers. Maybe you say a little bit in the beginning yourself about your background or your topics or what you focus upon. I think that's much better than me trying to recapitulate it from some document. And Clemens can maybe in this introduction also add a little bit how that contact came and what our connection is with you two.
Yeah, hello, good morning to everyone. And hello, Bob and Toshiko. We are really happy having you today for this little discussion. It was quite a while when I first met Bob, and we met each other in Japan on a conference. I was, I would say, a greenhorn, a rookie. It was my very first conference. And of course, it was also my first time in Japan. It was also the last time when I was in Japan, which I'm really not happy about. And it happened really by accident that we met each other on a table at the first big event on this conference. And usually I didn't know that, but in Japan, you drink beer a lot and you like drinking beer. And the first thing they said to start the whole conference is grab a glass of beer and say kampai, and let's open this conference. And just by accident, Bob was on the table, so we started a conversation. And this conversation, I would say, didn't stop till now. I was really lucky that I met Bob in Japan, because he knows Japan quite good and well. The reason why I think he is knowing Japan really good is because of his wife Toshiko, and it's not only that the discussion with Bob started, also a really interesting discussion then with Toshiko, which we constantly have, about teaching, about architecture, about designing, and especially also about this cultural backgrounds we all have. And I'm really happy to have both now here on this panel, because it's not only about the things how they teach in Plymouth, it's also about their background and the different ways how they grew up. I grew up in Austria, Bob in the United States, and Toshiko in Japan, and it's really perfect, I think, to discuss creativity from these different perspectives, and that's what we like to do. And now I would like to hand over to Toshiko and Bob.
Thank you. Vielen Dank. It's very good to be here. We've, at Clemens' kind invitation, we prepared a very short presentation. It's meant to be short, so stop us if we start meandering. And we thought that might be a good way of introducing ourselves. But as both Gabriela and Clemens have indicated, we are from elsewhere, and we will be elaborating upon that further. But I think picking up on what Clemens has said, Toshiko's from Japan, and she has a set of interests that come out of her background. I'm from the States originally, but I've been, seems like, all over the place. And I bring with me my own set of interests. And somehow Toshiko and I met in the middle in the UK. And I think that's also mirrored in how we approach architecture and how we approach teaching. So this short presentation is meant to illuminate that idea of starting at different points, but somehow coming together in the middle. So if it's okay, I'll start that. Okay.
Sure.
So, I think you have to enable me to share. And I don't know how to tell you how to do that. Or Clemens, if you want to put up on the screen what I sent.
I think Steffi has to give you the list that you allowed to share. She's the host.
Just a second. Please do try again.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're in business. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Screen says creativity and education.
Perfect, yes. Mm-hmm.
Good. So just to elaborate, Toshiko is the stream leader for design in the school, but also runs the BA Architecture Year 1. And I'm the MArch program leader, and I run the MArch Design Studio. So it's rather interesting to both be here speaking, because in some ways Toshiko greets the students coming into our school, and in a certain respect, I say goodbye as they're going out the door. So we have, again, this idea of starting at different points or being at certain extremes, and somehow we, again, meet in the middle. So we've got, I think, 10 slides, 5 for each of us, and we'll show those and just expand a little bit. And there's various text references along the way, and have sent a copy of this to Clemens, so you'll be able to get a hold of those if we're going through the images too quickly. Okay. So, Toshiko.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thank you again for inviting me. This is quite an honor to be here and being able to have this very, very interesting conversations. I am from Japan, but I have been in UK for 20 years. And most of architectural life are based on my experience in UK, although I never stop referencing things of where I'm from and what I've actually learned as a starting point in starting my architectural kind of journey in Japan. But throughout those experiences, that my interests are, it's a thing. I like a thing, and I like things I can feel and touch. And way that I engage with my students is, particularly with first year students, I often found that they're very, very conservative. They know a lot about architecture in their very own term. So to break the mold, started to kind of melting things about, no, it's actually architecture is about everything to stimulate the sense. That's my kind of mission that I think. Then this is the image that particularly I do as a cooking the material. So I pour hot water onto different timbers and then students smell. So that one I have on my hand is an oak tree. And as soon as I do it, students, I first give them a tree to touch. They can't quite tell what they are, the difference and anything. But then as soon as I pour the water, particularly with the oak, oh, this smells like my grandma's room or grandpa's room, or this smells like my dad's whiskey. And that stimulates kind of memory of the things they've already experienced in their life in relation to the architecture. So that's the kind of one of the type of the method I use to kind of start discussing about, okay, what does architecture do? Next, Bob.
Okay, so I'm up. And I think it's somehow fitting in the background. You can see on Toshiko's shelves some things to touch, things to hold. And behind me, you can see books. And contrary to a number of my friends' suggestion, it's not a screensaver. Those are real books behind me. And it shows perhaps the mindset I'm bringing to this, or where I'm coming from. If Toshiko's grounded in the substance of things, I'm more interested in relationships between people, relationships between things, relationships between people and things, and the nature of things that can prompt that, whether it be books or experiences. Two key reference points for me, at least in the context of this discussion, is Homi Bhabha's Location of Culture. And he talks about how culture is formed not at the center, but at the periphery, where one culture meets another. And culture is revitalized in that space. Second point of reference, which is not necessarily such a strong reference for me, it's included here more to try and demonstrate something, is a book on science fiction, notably my favorite TV show, Firefly, and movie Serenity. And I share an interest in science fiction with Clemens and a lot of other architects I know. And it has to do with something that art critic Robert Stamm referred to as the cross-disciplinary drift, i.e., I'm interested in architecture, but I'm also interested in what science fiction can tell me about architecture. I'm interested in what architecture can tell me about science fiction. I'm interested in various forms of literature and what that can inform me, or how that can inform me. So I'm just including that reference there to say, you know, the way that I'm looking at things is quite expansive, and I'm trying to seek out things, connections that offer new insights or relationships between things. I don't think that comes solely out of my having been elsewhere, but it's certainly been accentuated. And most of my adult life, I've been somewhere else. At the age of 26, I left the US for, I thought, 2 years, and I've never been back. So it's been over 30 years that I've been in the UK, with a bit of work in Africa and India on the way. I've taught or worked in about 12 countries around the world. I've lived, I think, in 5 at various points. So I've always been the person who's somewhere else, and this will come up later. I've always been the other as opposed to the self. I've been the outsider. And so I think that's given me a certain perspective or appreciation of a certain perspective on things. So Toshiko.
And I kind of presenting this whole works to the external examiner. Last year, actually, there was one external examiner after over 10 years of working with the students. she framed how I work with students in quite a most fitted way, which is making the ordinary extraordinary. Similar to the Bob's kind of experience, not quite as much extensive as he is going around all over the world. Me coming to the Western culture into the UK, and the first things, I'm sure when people go and travel different places, what you do is you notice things. Why? Because it's different to what you're familiar with. And that kind of act of noticing things and then start kind of either questioning or varying, or why is that? The questioning is becoming my kind of tool to try to understand things, but also stimulate that way I can kind of think things more imaginatively, or I guess it's the trigger the creativities. And I found that the way of noticing things, a way of kind of comparing or recognizing or re-recognizing the things you have in everyday life is the most useful tool as to prompt people to start thinking about things. And so this kind of idea of the making the ordinary to extraordinary, that seemed to be quite a strong theme throughout of how I embed in my kind of teaching. To prompt this also often kind of involves lots of touching and tactile kind of qualities, things that kind of you feel different, or it also often involves temperatures and things. So what could that be? And when we say Japan, often people, they mention about origami, folding things. And, oh, it's so Japanese, but what does it mean? Well, okay, what does folding actually reveal? So part of that exercise also in a studio we always do is to test our hands. I start doing origami with the students and then see how they actually engage with the paper. So that the paper, simple paper, photocopy paper, you started to work with them. And then by the time you kind of made something, it becomes something very different or phenomenal. And that whole process of engaging with the paper, just one simple materials, but it gives, again, the different haptic experience that the students can start to explore the things in a different way. So from that point, that often then students start to see the paper as a much more richer kind of material rather than just the paper. And then we kind of keep repeating that process. And then this Paul Jackson's book about folding technique, which some of you might have come across, which then you can make such a big crazy structure that you can even inhabit in if you happen to have a huge size of paper. And again, what's a simple material to simple mechanism could expand and explore the idea of the possibilities of the material. And that's the part of this kind of making this ordinary material into some extraordinary kind of structure or product. And that's the other things that I kind of enjoy exploring with the students in the teaching.
Right. I think from my perspective, I'm interested in the idea of representing things. And as a point of reference, I call upon Karsten Harry's book, The Ethical Function of Architecture. I'm not fully in agreement with him. He actually was at the same conference that Clemens and I were at. And even years later, people would come up to me and say, oh, you were at that conference. I heard about Karsten Harry's, because he laid into everybody. It was the most amazing thing. He just I looked at him and said, geez, you're a distinguished person. You've got all these books, you're well respected. Why are you attacking all these graduate students? I mean, it was just extraordinary. So personally, I don't like him, but I do like some of what he has to say. And I think that's important that, sometimes we can engage with other people, even though we may have a degree of conflict with them, and trying to find ways of connecting. And again, that will come up later. But in his book, he talks about the ethical function of architecture being to represent, i.e. to make us see anew. And a point of reference I often use with students in discussing this is in Japan, when you give somebody a business card, you don't just kind of go like this, and hand it over. And then, you don't grab it and kind of their card and stick it in your back pocket, because that would be rude. You make a big kind of presentation of, the person giving the card does it with two hands. And it's like, here's my business card. And in the same way, you receive it, you take it with two hands, and you make a concentrated, very explicit sign of, I'm reading your card, because this is you, and I respect you. And in the same way that the Japanese give presents, it's offered up, I've taken the time to select this gift, even if it's nothing that big. I've taken time to select it for you, and I've wrapped it. Not only have I wrapped it once, I've wrapped it twice, and then I've put it in a paper bag with some little ribbon on it. And it's just saying, look, I think so much of you, I want you to see that. And it takes that gift and represents it to you in a certain way. So it's a way I use to describe what I think Harry's is talking about. At the same time, also draw on somebody like Edward Said in his book, Beginnings. And in there, he critiques the idea of the authentic, the origins of things. I'm very wary in the way that Karsten Harries might say that there's some essential truth. I'm not after that phenomenological origin. What I'm interested in is making us see things anew, things that we may be familiar with, or find a way to present unfamiliar things in a way that we can perhaps latch onto more easily. But it's an act of enabling us to connect to things that's important for me. Toshiko?
So the working with the materials that I'm not only the interested in materials, to doing architecture, you often also engage with the context on site. Anything has a textures. That's what I want to explore with hands. And I also let the students to have a conversation with the materials, which in these conversations is actual activities of touching, twisting, bending, everything. And then I tell them to not to force the material, the shape that they want. It's forced, let the material dictate what you should be designing. So it's this, but that's all comes from understanding the obviously property of material, but also the varying the qualities, haptic qualities. And Kenya Haras is the Japanese product designer. He designs kind of he focuses on the things with very much to do with hapticity, whether if it's a stationary, whether if it's a door handle, whether if it's the switch, that's where the people's hands touches. So you don't even need to look at them. The hands should understand what you're touching and what it's for, or what's the qualities that you want to convey. So for us to understand that, what do we need to do? Yes, we need to understand the material. We need to have a conversation with the material. So we would spend lots of time touching all sorts of different things. Although that was the biggest challenge with this coronavirus online teaching. How do we share the feeling? How do we share the kind of qualities that we can actually physically touch? That's actually another interesting question that I'm actually trying to kind of tackle with right now, but more so because of that, again, we're revaluing how important it is for us as a designer to understand that different type of tactile qualities that we are surrounded by. Yeah.
Right. And Toshiko just spoke about the idea of having a conversation with materials. And I'm very interested in the idea of, or possibility of, the conversation with the other. And just as COVID presented certain challenges about how Toshiko operates in the design studio, presented challenges for me, because historically all the work I've done has been grounded in live projects, notably in urban regeneration projects where we're interacting with the community, local government, and so forth. COVID put in place some challenges about how we carried out that dialogue. We managed to do it, but it took a bit of shifting of our usual operations. But central to this idea of dialogue is trying to reveal new understanding. And a central point for this in me is Mikhail Bakhtin's writing on dialogism, and particular book that he, for me, discusses it most thoroughly, excuse me, is Art and Answerability. Also a good point of reference is Grant Kester's text, Not Going with the Flow. And the way that I've always personified Bakhtin's notion of dialogism actually draws upon another writer, Michael Holquist, talking about Bakhtin. And he says, paraphrasing Bakhtin, that at any given moment, I have a privileged position and I can see things that you cannot. In the context of this Zoom session, I can see the clouds and the clear sky behind Clemens' head. I can see his face, I can see him smiling, and he can't see any of that. At the same time, Clemens has an advantage position. He can see the books on the shelf behind me. He can see my face, my bald head. And the argument, the proposition is, at any given moment, while I can see things, I cannot see everything, nor can the other person. So why don't we try to see together? And that's what I'm interested in, this idea of dialogue, embracing the other and seeing what their perspective may add to our own understanding. Toshiko?
Yes, so now, talking lots of material, of course, that now you got idea, my main tools here is hands, and the making obviously cannot, or doing anything, you can't actually talk without using hands, but this case is I do often communicate to students, hands is everything. It has everything that to understand. It's not actually the brain, it's actually the hands that are more important to understand things, and then also to respond to the things that you're working with. So the Tim Ingold talks in the making that how making actually also describes and helps everyone to understand with no matter the language that you're actually part of. So whether it's the way of living and whether if it's the how things are working, but often figuring things out is that using hand and then trying to make something for what you need is that way to actually discover, yes, the part of where you are at, I guess. So this particular project that I took my students from UK, the students also coming from different backgrounds and different nationalities, and then went into this mountainous area in Japan, and we learned this traditional just timber joint with building very small frame, traditional frame of that building. And to be honest, I even grown up in Japan for 25 years of my life, that I have actually never encountered the whole system of how every joint comes in a one-to-one scale to be in a one the realized structure, because by then my education part and my practice in Japan was already much more modernized. So it was more prefabricated. So as well as to kind of introduce those skills and learning from the traditional skills, I also learning together with the students, making things together, sharing that this experience of understanding the materials and then also going through the process. So what exactly then? Maybe spending with this material for a certain amount of time together, then kind of keep following a certain method. What does it give us as a potential? What's the possibilities that we can explore further rather than just keep copying? So that part of the exploration is where that I always use as a challenge to students. Okay, we had this system being learned and introduced by the things being already done by other people. What's your then possibilities that you can expand further, explore further? That is where I think it's the toughest part, I would have to say, as to be creative in anyone, to be challenged in that part of the process. But at the same time, it's most exciting part for me to really expand the imaginations of what you can really do with your own hands and then the things you've been given or you're provided as materials.
Okay. Right. I was going to say, on this trip that Toshiko went on, I was along with our 1-year-old boy. So I had the pleasure of vicariously watching all of this going on. Then the next year, I actually brought some students to Innsbruck, and we did it kind of a counterpart and made a small construction at the end of year show. That would have been back about 2013 or 14, I think.
That was 2015.
2015, thank you. So yeah, we carried it on, and Toshiko's going to quickly show at the end something she did in 2016. So it's been an ongoing thing. The other aspect of how I work, I would refer to play. And again, utilizing play to reveal new relationships. A very good text on play is Miguel Sicart's Play Matters, also referred to Stan Allen's writings, notably his article on mapping the unmappable, and being willing to open up to new ideas, but also understanding play can be a bit disruptive to things that are out there in the world, or disruptive even to our own ways of thinking or working. And if you may remember when you were a little child, or if you spent any time around a 3 or 7-year-old, which I do all the time now, it's fascinating to see how they can reimagine things. And something that's so simple, you know, like a chopstick suddenly becomes this spaceship, or you know, whatever it may be in the child. They're so expansive in how they look at the world, and they're not limited by convention, not limited because somebody told them it can't be. And I think it's a spirit that we try to, I certainly try to instill in students I'm working with, and I think Toshiko does the same, to get them to be willing to question their own preconceptions. And there's various exercises I do that are meant to prompt people to look at things differently, to play a game of what if. I don't know if you just want to quickly summarize, Toshiko.
Yeah, I think this is just, yeah, I think I've said enough about how I work. Yeah, again, I go back to, I like things that has with a texture, and that's how everything starts when I want to go through the creative process. And that's what I'm trying to actually share and introduce to my students. So this is one way of learning and understanding architecture.
And I think the use of the word dialogue here is important, and I pick up on it with reference to dialogic play, which draws upon Bakhtín's notions of dialogism, and also brings together with it play and that engagement with the other and seeing what it can open up whether it's another person, another thing, another way of thinking. And I mentioned at the beginning that Toshiko and I were starting from different places in the world and coming together, meeting in the UK. And I think in certain ways, what we value as architects and how we approach education starts in somewhat different places, but we meet in the middle. And I think where we're meeting is around this notion of dialogue, whether it's a dialogue with materials, dialogue with the other, dialogue with our own imagination, and understanding that that dialogue is something that opens up possibilities. It affords us a way of reconsidering things, of seeing things anew. And to finish off this idea of kind of starting at a different place and coming together, Toshiko began by thanking everyone for the opportunity to speak here today. So I will finish this presentation by, again, thanking you for the opportunity to speak. It's really been good to be here, and very happy to, well, looking forward very much to the discussion which will follow. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Bob and Toshiko. You have, you are, in a way, you are impersonating some of the arguments and strategies we have heard from one of our of your precursors. We have the designer Michele De Lucchi for the first session, and also we asked him what are your preferred tools to work with, and one of his answers was it's words and hands. And yeah, just to recapitulate it very short, of course, there was a lot of other things said too, but words and hands being such opposite ways of yeah, of operating, of its reflection, and it's the thinking and the making. And a lot of what you have said, especially Toshiko, there is this wonderful book, The Thinking Hand by Johanni Palasma, which probably everybody knows, which points out the relationship between the creation and the body as a whole. So it's not only the reflection and the academic layout and the development of thoughts, but how it is stored and manifested and related with the body itself. So Toshiko, you have displayed and explained that in a very good way, and I wanted to ask you about this difficulty now in this pandemic time. How do you overcome this obstacle that we have now of being not able to to produce together in this creative environment that is given when a group of people is coming together, and that is again referring to Bob's main argument of the community, of the being together, of the group activity. And so how do you overcome this obstacle of the distance? And
yes, so my part of, obviously, all my experimentation and exploration does involve the use of 5 senses that we have. And the online teaching, obviously, I don't think I have completely overcome, but we have been trying a different method and attempted a certain different way. The majority of them obviously replaced with the exaggeration in the information in a site, so the visual informations. And the one of the book been introduced in a slide. It's by the Kenya Hara, the Japanese product designer. In his book, also talks about when you see the images of the object that he designed or what he talks about without even touching it, it triggers, like if it's a lemons, and it triggers people's imaginations, people's almost like a real sense from that. So that's the kind of the best we could have done so far. So for example, I have like a kit, I've been calling it as a cooking show. So use materials on my table, doing things, showing it as a live to students, and then students follows what I'm doing. Or that I go out to the site on the live feed using Instagram, and then grabbing stuff, touching things, showing a little bit of a sketch on rubbing the grounds and stuff. Obviously, this is a kind of first years in a undergraduate, so in a way, kind of that level of very, it's a very kind of basic and dissected way of approaching to.
This sounds a bit like a laboratory demonstration. And do you encourage your students then to reproduce or yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So you are giving them the set of materials, the or the recipe, if we stay with the analogy of the cooking.
Yes.
And everybody is producing his own meal or dish, or is it then afterwards coming together? Is it?
So how we do it is, as you said, ingredient is the recycled materials. So we kind of keep it as what they can find in a house. They're not allowed to spend any money or don't use Amazon to buy any new materials. Maybe use a box from Amazon, but not spending money. And then, so that's been communicated in advance. And then we do things together, and then we set the timer, half an hour to do this model, 1 hour to do this test and diagram. And then we have this online Microsoft things called Team has a folder. So all the students has a depository, digital depository. So as soon as they do make things or they record the process by the camera, very convenient our life that we are having this with all the tools. So they take photos, they send straight to the folders, then we can open it as a kind of show and tell. So we did not lose this kind of immediacy in terms of, but then the difficulty without having a direct physical contact is to keeping students motivated. That's more the difficult part, but we are trying it kind of as much in that way.
Toshiko, I have an additional question, if I may ask you one. I really like this comment of yours talking about the ordinary and the extraordinary, like finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. And I don't know what, just by accident yesterday night I'm reading a book, and this book, I always read books at night, and this book is about Netsuke. Is this correct? This tiny little Japanese.
It's a little town.
It's like this figures, the small ones. Yeah, I was reading this book, like I'm reading this now. I'm now on page 120. And yesterday I looked up what actually Netsukes are. I just had this, and it was always like I knew it's tiny and what they do, and I didn't know how they look. And they were explaining in this book. It's actually an autobiography, and it's about somebody who is collecting Japanese art, and he's explaining these little pieces, showing little stories, like small stories. Like there could be a rabbit, but there could also be like a person doing something, normal things, really normal things, not fancy stuff. But he's writing then that the speciality in these little pieces are that they're so special, that they're so extraordinary, even though they are ordinary little pieces, and they're really made in years. Like the artists, they need years to do that. That's how like the old ones, yeah.
Mm.
So now my question is this way of thinking, of developing, you were talking about, is this actually a tradition like you picked up on your like at home? Because I just read yesterday the Japanese concept is making an ordinary thing extraordinary. I just read that yesterday in this book, and now you're talking about that. and it was actually really connected to Japanese art and these netsukes. And there was another comment which was quite interesting. This author said there is no Rembrandt, or there is no Pantheon in Japan, because it's not about this huge shows of the powerful way of showing art and events. It's these tiny little pieces, these tiny things making ordinary stuff extraordinary. Is this just a stupid way of looking at it, or is there some truth in this comment?
It might be, though. I mean, that's true. I didn't really think. I just, you know, I don't think it's everyone in that way, but then it was also truth in a way of like traditional artwork, or, you know, those are wow. Architecture, idea of architecture, and architecture also takes the kind of power of showing off the, you know, political power, or turns into the monumental figure. That's pretty much came from outside of my country, because the first architecture that carried a powerful meaning to control the kind of authoritarian thing is the temple, from Buddhism temple. That's the kind of how the building being introduced in my culture. Therefore, until then, the most kind of iconic thing was the warehouse to keep the rice, because rice is the most important thing in my culture. And that's then eventually used as a shrine. That's something very respectful kind of symbol. And then that's just carried on. So still, you look at the Shinto shrines, the main building of every Shinto shrine is originated from the warehouse for the rice. So again, yeah, and then you look at the Hiroshige's famous painting. Hiroshige is famous now, but all his idea of his painting was him wanted to record all the seasonal change of Japanese sceneries. And then the people's lifestyle. So I guess that maybe, yeah, it's a kind of French Barbizon painters that they weren't necessarily interested in like some notable people's portrait and stuff like that. So I guess it might be rooted into that attitude, and I think also to do with this wabi-sabi. So it's the tea kind of, you know, the culture with the tea ceremonies and everything. We do appreciate things kind of being follows nature. I guess
it's again making
material.
the ordinary. It's again making the ordinary extraordinary. Like you drink tea and you make it an extraordinary event out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, Bob, you drink tea now, I think. Yeah, you usually drink tea.
Can I add something here?
Yeah, sure.
Obviously, I'm an outsider. I have the external gaze looking upon Japan, but several things come to mind, and Toshiko will, I'm certain, correct my very poor Japanese. First is a phrase, ichigo, ichie, which is one time, one moment. And the idea of focusing on any particular thing that's in front of you. And part of the tea ceremony is the idea of cast the world aside, leave all those troubles, all the things that are bothering you, just concentrate on the intimacy or minutiae of certain things here and take time to appreciate them. And there's more to it in terms of a culture that's built up around it, but lying at the heart of it is this idea, no, just take time to focus on things and appreciate what that thing has to tell us about life and our way of life. Another phrase, perhaps overused, but I think is relevant, is mono no aware, which is sensitivity to things. And I think that comes out of what Toshiko's referred to in terms of nature and the wabi-sabi aesthetic, which is tied back to Zen Buddhism, going back to 7th century. And within wabi-sabi, there's an understanding that we can learn from nature, and that nature tells us that everything is imperfect, incomplete, and impermanent. So when Toshiko refers to the idea of the change of seasons, recognizing that those things that are before us, like the fabled cherry blossoms, are only there for a short time. So let's take time to appreciate those things while they're here. Or when the leaves change color in the autumn, and in Japan, like in the States, you get these brilliant reds and yellows and oranges. Okay, this is such a sublime moment. Let's pause. And I don't know of anywhere else in the world, like in Japan, where they say, hey, the cherry blossoms are out, let's all stop what we're doing and go have picnics under the cherry trees. And there's just this appreciation of that. I don't want to overstate that, because Japan's also an incredibly urbanized country, and in people's daily lives they can be removed from our conventional notions of nature, so it's easy to perhaps romanticize it. But there is something in cultural traditions that appreciate that the intimacy of things, and also that there's a value of the body and learning through the body, engagement with the body, which stands in contrast to Western thinking, say with Cartesian thinking, that really values the mind over the body.
Is there then like also a connection between your like using the hand, the technology, the method you started teaching at the beginning with the students, in combination with this making ordinary stuff extraordinary? Like if I can ask you both, Bob, is like this way of treatment or way of looking at things and redoing them, like, I mean, while you take them in your hands and work with them, you start manipulating them, you explore them, and then you start changing them, maybe in a playful way, and then find the beauty and the more than you think you have in your hands. Do you think this is more connected now to this method of the hand, or can you also find that in the word, using the words?
I find it in both. And what I try to present to students is there's no one way of doing things. And I say that not to contradict what Toshiko is doing, but rather I recognize that with students coming to a master's program, they've come from different backgrounds. And we have a number of students who come from Plymouth. We have a Erasmus exchange student or two a year from Innsbruck, Hannah this year, who's doing very well. That's a little bit of a plug there. And we have students from Southeast Asia, et cetera. They come from all over the place, so incredibly diverse backgrounds. And partly because of my own experience of having been to so many places and a view that there's not a universal truth, I don't want to convey to them, here's the way I want you to do it. This is, I want you to become like Bob Brown. Rather, what I'm trying to say is I recognize you guys are bringing something to the table already. What I want you to be able to do is find your own way of working with that, which may be based on the hand, it may be based on the word, it may be based on something else. So it presents certain challenges about opening it up so much, particularly for students who come, let's say, from a educational culture where they have been told what to do. And we're suddenly saying, no, you tell us. But I'm adamant that that's useful, and it certainly reflects, I think, my own ethos. Whereas I think Toshiko is not trying to be restrictive, but I think, as she says, she's trying to perhaps provoke students who come in with certain preconceptions about what architecture is when they enter into year one design. And my instinct is through the hand, she's trying to kind of say, wait, I want you to re-look at this. And the way I'm going to do this is get you to work in a way that you've never worked before, or most of you haven't worked, which is through the hand. So it's a good kind of shifting them off balance. Whereas I think I shift them off balance in other ways, which is perhaps bombardment with, references to dead Russian philosophers named Mikhail Bakhtin, or whoever it may be. And they get all these sorts of other types of stimulation, the word and so forth. And we, just to finish this off, we play all sorts of games in the spirit of play, which can be about the poetics of making, or the Greek word pieces, or the idea of playing word games. So it's dealing with multiple things, because I'm trying to find a way that works for this very multivalent student body who's already bringing with them 3+ years of education plus maybe professional experience. And I don't want to disavow that. Rather, I'm trying to find ways of enabling them to build upon that.
If I can say this in my own word.
Yes, please.
I think it's, I'm partly guilty of it, but also I think it's the experiencing also the Far Eastern Oriental culture and education, then coming into the Western cultures and education here. Also, these days with overflooded information that the students we get is just tend to overthink things. The words in the head is just too many of them going on and cook. And I found this kind of, it's like, I know it's me, loves food. So I keep going back to the analogy of cooking, but I always say to my children, until you taste them, you don't know what it tastes. And if you don't taste it, and until you find out, you're going to be missing so many important things in the flavor of your life. And the working with material, touching materials or the textures, I think it's like this is a tongue to taste the materials. And that process is to kind of not rely on your brain all the time. I think academias doing architecture, more you grow, you have more words. We have just too much of things that we trying to, and as soon as that this word in the brain, trying to then control your hand to do something with what you are having or working with your hand, it forces materials or forces things in a way that are maybe not quite right. Whereas I wanted to almost have that other way around. I know the brains controls the humans' bodies, but actually it doesn't have to be like that. We could also make sometime the hands to understand things first and then send the information back to brain to kind of cleanse this kind of overcrowded world that we are living right now with overflooded information.
Yeah, that's certainly a fact that we're facing currently, this over exposure to information, to impressions of all kinds. So we need to develop our own filters to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And in neuroscience, it's known. I mean, the brain has trillions of neurons and connection, and is basically able to store all the information we get in our life. But in the end, we do not. Of course, because the brain also has only a limited capacity to process all that. And as we have learned in previous lectures and learned from neuroscientists, the brain is bit by bit establishing its own network and its own connections, and those connections who are used a lot, they manifest more and are more stable. And so we're building our learning upon our experience, what we learn, what we know on our memory. But again, every exposure to some new information is then added somewhere. So no, what I'm trying to say is this current situation of this overexposure and how to deal with it. So creative situations happen in between order and chaos. And as you mentioned before, as also Bob pointed out earlier in his talk, it's the borders and boundaries where things actually happen. And this is true for the mind and for nature. Also in nature, as I like to point out, because I'm a keen amateur gardener, I spend all my other time in my rather big garden, and I can observe that very well, that emergence and the coming up of new things, of unplanned things, it always happens on the border. And alive beings like the situation on the borders, be it plants or animals. So birds, for instance, or invertebrates, or small creatures, they always are looking for this borderlines. And the same is true for our situation as creative beings. And it always has been described in the research about creativity that you need this good mix between stable and unstable situations. And another thing I read the other day in one of those books, it was a very pictorial, or it was an image of that situation, which described you always need more pieces on the table, because and Toshiko has, or no, Bob, you had mentioned the pieces on the table before as well. And so I thought, that's exactly the thing. In order to be creative, you need more on the table than you actually, than maybe the tradition or the conventions are offering you, meaning in our case, architecture books or normal education principle, whatever, it doesn't matter what you speak about. You need more components on the table in order to add them to your own universe. And in that respect, I think whether it's the cultural or the anthropological situation, this is really a very very exemplary what you tell us and what you show us, that this location, different locations, different cultural backgrounds, that this is really a very good and creative situations.
Can I pick up on that for a moment? Because I think you've raised a number of fantastic observations, and just would like to add to that. And I think Toshiko would as well. For me, running through what you've said is this notion of the boundary or the edge, whatever word we might want to use, or threshold, perhaps more significantly. Baba refers to it as a liminal space in between. And also the reference to food. And anybody who knows Toshiko knows that always comes back to food. She likes cooking. I like eating her food, so that kind of works for us. I would disagree slightly with Clemens. We may met over beer, but I think we bonded over a wonderful Japanese dish called shabu shabu, which is kind of like fondue. I took him to this place, and we had a lot of beer with that meal, but it was also, I think it was and the meal's meant to be shared like fondue or Chinese hot pot. And I think that's rather telling and I think pertinent here. And in my own work, I find ways of taking them to the edge, and Toshiko does as well, but I'll let her explain that. But for me, I take students to situations or locations that are perhaps out of the norm. For a number of years, I was taking them to Macau in China. But wherever I'm working, I take them to some place that's a bit down on its luck, a place that's socially, economically challenged. And a former colleague years ago, when we were visiting a site in the Basque region, we were taking a bus and we kind of came over this hill down into this abandoned, disused port area. He just kind of yelled out, "Oh, now we're in real Bob Brown territory." And the reason I like taking students to those locations is it does shift the ground under their feet. And it forces them to rethink some of those conceptions they may have brought with them. And that also has echoes of the places I worked as a practicing architect doing community development, whether in the UK or Africa or India, these places that were so out of the norm. And I had to find ways of rethinking things because the old rules I brought with me didn't necessarily apply. And so in my own teaching, I like to try and find ways of temporarily destabilizing the students in order to prompt them to think about the possibility of engaging with the other as a way of adding insight to what they're doing. And bringing it back to the reference to food, one project that comes to mind that at the beginning of the year when we were working in Macau, a place that's defined both by its Portuguese heritage, but also by overwhelmingly Chinese population now in the presence of Chinese culture, but also this Western, almost Las Vegas-like influence of all the casinos there. I had the students create a dish, and I asked them specifically to work with something from two different cultures to create one dish of food that they would bring to this big meal that we would share. The most notable foods that I remember was one guy who made wasabi cheesecake. And if you don't know wasabi, just think a really hot mustard combined with cheesecake, which was extraordinary taste. And the other one, which was really very delightful, is they made lasagna using sweet and sour pork. And that may or may not resonate with you, but it was just delicious. Gorgeous. And it was just a way of getting these guys to think about how do we deal with these contexts where there's multiple things present. And I'll turn it over to Toshiko, who deals with her own way of cooking. I don't know of any other architectural tutor who teaches their students how to make sushi, but I'll leave that as a prompt for her.
I think it's a huge one. I do love the boundary, and I do agree that what you were saying, Gabi, that's this need to push them. We always been pushed into the edge, and then we can't quite balance. So then that's where we have to think, what do we do? How do we kind of work with this? And but I think it's whether if it's cooking or condition of the architecture we are working in. I think that I do like this boundary condition because that's where the different textures meets, and you can start mixing them together. So if it's like a fusion of the food, it comes together and then you generate something. What can I do with it? Oh, let's make a cheesecake with wasabi. I don't know whether I wanted to taste, but it'll be interesting. And it's a different experience. And then this, whether if it's like the being in the premise that we are surrounded by lots of edge condition to the water. And obviously the textural contrast is water meets with the the ground, and its part is a very granite-based rocks, to then the best part is actually because of the sea, we get the tide change. So we have this intertidal area. That's where the it's for me it's a tasteful, textural, rich conditions that we use as students to kind of explore and understand what does this each different type of the texture means to understand the place and what's actually happening. So yeah, that's, I think it's it's interesting that how things all kind of meeting, but that is true, that kind of idea of this in between things, whether if it's taste and conditions, that's the crucial, most interesting part to explore.
I thought you might mention your trip to Dartmoor.
Oh yeah, that's the edge in terms of using our body as an edge. So these days with this issue of climate emergency, with trying with any sorts of way, the best way I thought to make students understand the climate and environmental condition is to send them to walk in the rain in the middle of Dartmoor in the winter. And they didn't like the idea at first. And what they have to design for that is they have to design a spacesuit to protect. So they needed to, before we went, we did a research of the northern parts of the Dartmoor, which is quite rough. And it's the weather is so changeable. So they had to do the desk research about the understanding environmental condition, and they have to come up with the design of this space. We call it a space, but basically a device to protect them based on them identifying what's the condition that they are most kind of cautious of. And then I gave extra challenge of using recycled plastic. So they couldn't spend any money to buy any material. They had to collect any sorts of plastic to generate their spacesuits. So they made it. And then we went, and then the day that we decided to go for a walk was one of the heaviest rain day, which once we went out to in the wild like that, you don't know. So it was raining, and 3 hours we just kept walking, and they all came back and survived. I didn't lose any of them. But in the end, the students are all kind of that was the one exercise that they've learned a lot about the kind of fabric of things as the device to protect themselves, but at the same time, it's what's really the environmental climate means to them in relation to also idea of sighting. So I guess that's just, okay, if we need to learn the condition, let's just get out and feel it with our own way.
You let them feel again.
Actually. Yeah.
And
yeah.
You were obviously lucky that it rained that day. I was just imagining you were saying, okay, but that day it was full sunshine and it was blazing hot.
Yeah, it's actually not going to work.
Protection.
Yeah, but we don't get enough sun, Gabi, here.
Yeah.
You mean there's no big risk to have sun in UK?
Exactly.
It's sunny now. We do get sun.
Yeah. We do get sun, but yeah, the particular part of that Dartmoor is very interchangeable in a small amount. Yeah.
And the weather changes very quickly there. It can go from being sunny and 15 degrees to 0 and raining or snowing in the space of about a half an hour. So you have to be really well prepared because the weather shifts, and they're always rescuing people out there. By the way, Dartmoor is a national park, and it kind of looks like the moon in places, if that helps to understand what we're talking about.
When we came after the walk, we came back to the hostels, and then the manager at the hostel told me, how did you manage to walk with these guys for 3 hours? Because there is a camp nearby where they train all those soldiers. And them, and also the other people had this thing that is called tento. So young people, like a high school aged or gymnasium aged children, they go out and do the training, like orientations for walking for a day. Everyone had to cancel their trip, and we are the only one went out. So I was like, please don't tell that to anyone, because then we're gonna be in trouble. But
well, now it's online, Toshiko.
And I even have evidence of film that the students has been filming themselves. So, yeah.
So you have the better survival camp than the military and everybody else.
Yeah, I can prove it to British military that I could.
Architecture studies are the better survival camp anyway for all kinds of professions, and
Yes.
some research on professional careers have pointed out that, I mean, there are many architects educated everywhere in the world, and not all land in their own profession, but it has been researched that architects are the most successful profession in other professions as well, because we do cover such a large territory of topics and of methods, and so our training is very universal in a way, and it's the most it seems to be one of the most useful in the real world. Well, our time is slowly nearing the end, and what I would like to ask for one point is, so the students, if anybody has an urgent question, please write it into the chat. If not, maybe you have some remarks. I mean, I could go on with this conversation into a number of different realms from now. One would be, but maybe we keep that for some other opportunity and some other conversation. So one would be the question of aesthetics in this whole span of anthropological differences, and the rituals. That was another, the question of the ritual would be something else to speak about, because you touched that to some extent. Maybe that's the question about the ritual you could still speak a little bit upon, because Toshiko has pointed out this Japanese tradition of the nature connection and this Buddhist background of the very different evaluation of that is ritualized partly, well, and of course the question, I mean, all our discussion has touched today very much tangible dimensions, but also mental dimensions. But this relationship now with the digital world could also be interesting. But I think we leave that out because it's getting too much in this context. It just interests me generally. But maybe one last word about rituals and the role of the object in, because the object has been touched in. Clemens, you had mentioned those
things, netsuke.
Yeah, I think we also should write up all those terms. Also, Bob, you've mentioned two of those Japanese terminologies, and I would be interested. Maybe you can also write it into the chat what those
it's
mentioned there.
But it's showing chat disabled.
Also, I'm gonna answer the question from studio.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, I do have a link of projects and photographs. So I can send it to you.
Great. That's good.
it's
Perfect.
quite,
Good.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm. No, I'm also really full of questions, but I have the nice opportunity that I can continue the discussion with Bob and Toshiko. We don't have to do it right now because we definitely will meet again. My question, but I still need to ask it, maybe also to the audience. My question is about these boundaries and thresholds we were talking about. I was wondering if this threshold might be when we are when we work with in a creative process between the knowing and the unknowing. I was wondering if this not knowing what to do and how to do. This is the thing we usually facing when we try to do new stuff when we are creative, and this was also would have been one of my questions to Bob when you were talking about the play and the playfulness, because this is my understanding of the play. As more I know, as harder it gets to play. That's also when you're referring to the children, they actually don't know in the way we know. They just play, yeah. And I have this concern, as much as we learn, as much we read books, as more we know, it harder it gets for many, not all, but for many, than to be playful with new situations and like riding the wave of the unknowing and these limitations you're mentioning, are they like part of these knowledge who you start bearing, and is then, for example, just using the hand a method to not take care of this knowledge, but just with this doing, it's like a possibility to leave this knowledge behind in a moment and make a playful move. It's now again a big question. Maybe we don't have the time to discuss this, but it was just I wanted to maybe it's more a statement, not only a question.
Sorry, I'm just typing up some stuff for the chat.
Should I then maybe answer first with
Yeah, you go. I sent it off, but yeah, go ahead.
Or maybe do you answer the Clemens question both first, and then we can go back to the ritual.
I think your question gets to the heart, I think, of what these talks, as I understand them, are about, this idea of creativity. And I think it's a highly valuable series, as you know, I can see that you're running, that's asking of each of us, how do we create? How do we find that space mentally, possibly even physically, in which we can create? And as you've quite rightly said, I've referred to play and the possibility play offers. And that's a difficult thing. You know, I can take for granted play because I'm familiar, comfortable with it. And I look at my children, but you're right in saying that they don't do it in a conscious way. They're just being. And I've got too much baggage. I know what I'm doing. And the students have too much baggage. And the difficult thing is that for many students, at least in the context of UK education, they've had play beat out of them by the pre-university education system.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think that's all around the world.
I am not a big fan of it, even though our boy is within that, because it asks them to sit at an assigned desk, only speak when you're called upon, raise your hand if you want to go to the bathroom. All these things that are actually, you know, while I understand the value of order that Gabi spoke about, also some of those things can be quite restrictive. And I remember, you know, as a brief thing, when I was a young boy, and we had this assignment, we had to draw these things. And as a young kid, I really liked grapes. And there was the thing where I was supposed to draw 2 grapes and 10 oranges, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I want to draw more grapes. So I drew 10 grapes. I wrote it correctly. I wrote 10 correctly, etc. And the teacher said, oh, you've done it wrong. And I just thought, who cares? What do you care whether I wrote 10 oranges or 10 grapes? Is that really the purpose here? I like grapes, so I want to draw grapes. And I just found that kind of, rules for the sake of having rules a bit insipid and restrictive. And I say to the students, the closest model, what we're trying to do here in the master's program is kindergarten, because you explore, you test, you experiment, and you find things out. And some of them work, some of them don't. And inherent in that play is risk. And this is the difficult thing, because of their pre-university education, so many of them have become afraid of taking risk.
Exactly.
And so what we try to do, and for ever since I've been teaching, rely upon workshops, this kind of space of play that's protected. There's no mark attached to it. There's no public criticism. Everything is, let's take a chance just to explore your work from a different perspective to see what happens. And it's short. It might be something as quick as an hour. It might be 3 hours. Sometimes they're all day long. But it's meant to be the space of play where they have freedom to experiment. And what I find through repetition of that, through series of workshops across a day or across the week, they become more open to the idea of playing. For some, it comes immediately. Others takes a long time. It takes a long time. And educator Bell Hooks, who's written very evocatively about the idea of education, made reference to the idea. She was surprised that students were afraid of taking risk. And so I think it's a very pertinent thing for us as educators and for students as well to think about, well, why are we here? And part of it is, that active learning is about taking risks, of exploring unknown things and trying to make sense of them and seeing how they work. And in some ways, maybe Toshiko would agree with me, maybe it's easier with BA year 1, I don't know, or maybe BA year 2, second year, they're into the spirit. But I find MArch students may have had encultured into them, don't take a risk because you might get criticized, so that they can be hesitant. So again, it's important that how we structure the space of play as tutors, we communicate that it's a safe place. And one of the things I do is to illustrate or demonstrate what they have to do in the workshop. I do it myself in advance, and I open myself up to critique. And I don't pre-think it. I just say, okay, here's the workshop. Here's what I'll do. And I just off the top of my head generate something. And I'm trying to communicate, look, I'm willing to take a chance. I'm willing to take embarrass myself and all in front of you. I'm just asking you to take a chance at your own desk. And it's trying to, I don't know, lead by example, and say, look, I'm willing to make a fool of myself, but, I think something can come out of it. But I should let Toshiko comment as well. Sorry.
Wow, there are a bunch of questions, so I don't know where to start, but I guess that to a certain extent what I do is it does involve the level of playfulness. What I keep saying to myself, wow, and also students all the time, don't stop thinking, what if I do this? What if I twist this in this way? What if I do something that I don't usually do? What's going to happen? That's one kind of method that I use. I mean, I also use that to daydream myself, because that also often helps me to be creative about daydreaming. But I think it's interestingly also people coming into first years that, however, they were particularly in the English education, how they've been trained to think and prepare for exam, it made them super kind of conservative. And then, as Bob said, it's so afraid to make a mistake. And it's all about gaining the mark and not about the process or what they're actually, the quality of what they're experiencing. So it is really hard. I think in a way, the second years in our undergraduate would be most fun if we have an opportunity to actually play with them. They'll be a bit more open to it. But yeah, not knowing, and that's the put people in such a extremely insecure place. When they're insecure and they get like, you know, become uptight to be molded into some kind of uncomfortable situation. So that's why I, you know, particularly me doing this job without using my own language, the other purpose of this kind of involving touching materials, making things, is the introducing common language in a way. It doesn't matter how good you are in English or not. Everyone can feel things, everyone can move their hand and do something. And then hoping that that becomes the kind of way of building up the different level of confidence. And once we can do that, and then perhaps that the student can open up the kind of the mold that they kind of been forced to build up in a way of their previous educations.
I just want to step in if I can. I wanted to pick up on Gabriela's question, or at least one of the questions as well. So, but have you finished, Toshiko?
Yeah, I'm finished now. I wanted to move on to the
I'd quickly throw in, I think it's one of the pluses of traveling. There are many pluses of traveling, but one thing is it forces you to take risk and engage with the unknown. And, you know, it can be challenging at times, you know, I'm not dismissing that, but it forces you to kind of get used to that idea of, you know, kind of stepping off the bus and you're the only one like you for anywhere around, or, you know, you find yourself in kind of perplexing situations. You have to make sense of it. You have to find a way of dealing with it. So, you know, big advocate of that. But going back to things that Gabi's mentioned, you know, I could spend forever talking about aesthetics, but I think you seem to be more interested in the aspect of ritual. Is that correct?
Well, yes, but I think unfortunately our time is really getting towards the end, because ritual is another big discussion. Yeah. Maybe we really leave that for another opportunity. I don't want to
That's okay.
to put it down now, but it's such a big field. The other thing I also wanted to come back to what Bob, you have said, and maybe we can then finish the session, is what I found interesting is your mentioning of that situation with drawing the grapes, because obviously that was a paradigm shift for you, and in that situation you have an insight into the system to some degree, because you learned for yourself, okay, this is not my system, and this thing with the paradigm shifts, that's also in a more global context, a very interesting thing. Also, some of our other lecturers have spoken about. This was also, paradigm shift was also something that occurred in our first talk. And yeah, so.
I'll just quickly comment on that. I'm sure Toshiko can as well. I think this idea of paradigm shift is crucial. The world that we live in now is not the world that existed when I was a student. So in the space of 35 years, it's changed considerably. I went to the university where the Super Cray computer was developed, and we didn't have computer equipment in the studio till my final year. Now everybody takes it for granted. I cannot imagine what life will be like for your students in 35 years. I like to, the science fiction geek in me likes to imagine it, but it's changing so much, and we have to prepare ourselves and our students for things shifting so dramatically. It's just, and climate change, we go off on a whole other discussion about that. In 30 years, 2050, the world's going to be so vastly different. And I think that's crucial for how we prepare our students. How can they deal with change? How can they envision change? Could go on at length, but I think what you're saying, I can't emphasize it enough. It's absolutely vital. And I think for me, part of that is enabling students to see that that change can come from themselves, that it's not necessarily something that they are the passive recipients of, but rather that they may be able to find it in themselves. And the professor who I always thought of as a mentor stood out for me because he was the first one to ever say, well, what do you think? Up to that point, I'd always been told this is what you're supposed to do. And he was the first one that said, in this project, I want you to begin with what's of interest to you. And that was another watershed moment for me, or a paradigm shift. And wow, nobody's ever asked that. And I suddenly had to think about, well, what do I think? What do I value?
Well, Clemens, the last word from you.
I just want to thank you. It was so nice having you and talking, and I just could continue and continue and continue, and we will anyway.
I think we find an opportunity to do so.
Yeah. Very much welcome it. Clemens and I have been speaking about how we, apart from this, how we orchestrate some sort of further engagement. So this just gives a further incentive to that.
Yeah, and no, it's just super interesting, and I really, on the one hand, I like this how you describe the teaching and the background of your teaching, and especially, as you know, I'm always interested in the cultural background and the like from where we come and what we do with it, and how we deal with ourselves and with the opposite based on our heritage we have. And I think this is super important for all the students, for everybody, to understand that you need to understand yourself to be a creative person. That's really important. Thank you very much.
Hey,
thank you
again from me. Thank you very much to Toshiko, to Bob, and until the next opportunity to go on talking.
Yeah,
thank you, and thanks for the students. So we'll now close the session for today.
Tschüss.
Bye.
And I send you by email to Clemens for the thing.
Yes,
thank you.